All right, all right. Come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll wait a few minutes to get started, but so excited for Kyle and I to present the Content Rebalancing Framework webinar for y'all. We've got a lot in store for you. This is something that really is at the core of what iPullRank does, because it's like that intersection between content and SEO. But while we're waiting for everyone to come in, if you could just maybe write something in the chat, let me know that we are broadcasting, bright and shiny to y'all on this wonderful Tuesday. It is, for those of you who are in the US, obviously it was an extended weekend for Memorial Day. For those of you who are not in the US, most of US folks were off on Monday. So I can imagine the social media platforms were a little bit quieter, or you probably saw, pool parties of people trying to beat the heat in the U.S. The weather, I'm in Northern Virginia, where it's hitting 90 degrees plus Fahrenheit, and the pools are all open. Kyle, how hot is it where you're at in Jersey?
In New Jersey, it is extremely hot and humid, and I am kicking myself for not scheduling my pool opening appointment sooner. So, that is definitely something that I'm going to be working on over the next week or so to try to, make sure I have that, source of cooling down.
Oh, dude, you got to get your pool pad. Now, are you a pool? And this question goes out to everyone in the audience. Are you a pool person or are you a beach person? If you had to choose between.
I grew up going to the beach every summer, like almost every week with the family. Definitely really enjoyed the beach as a kid, but as I got older, the crowdedness aspect of it kind of got to me. And I think even now that we're somewhat post COVID, even being outside, I don't really want people like 3 feet away from me kicking sand at me. So I think I've turned into a pool person now that I have one.
Oh man, oh, you got to pull. I'm jealous because I feel like obviously there are different things. I to your point, it's like I appreciate the nostalgia of the beach, but there's something a lot like cleaner and well, pools aren't always clean. I guess when it's your own pool, it feels
Yeah,
cleaner
yeah.
as opposed to
Community
a community
pools,
pool.
I don't
You
know.
don't know. You don't know what the 7-year-olds are doing. Hello, Big Dog Bed Company from Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire. I always brutalize the UK pronunciations. But what do you say? Let's dive in. We're going to talk about some content rebalancing today. So before we dive in, just a little bit about ourselves. My name is Garrett Sussman of iPullRank. I'm a demand generation manager. I've been in content marketing and SEO for the past 10 plus years working for, I've been actually, tomorrow is my my anniversary with iPullRank, and it's been an awesome year here. Prior to that, I was working for a variety of SaaS companies. And before that, I was in a design marketplace doing the Silicon Valley thing. I live in Northern Virginia with my wife and 3-month-old daughter and puppy. And really excited to talk content with you all today. And this is Kyle. Kyle, you want to tell them about yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Kyle Marino. I'm a content strategist for iPullRank. Well, for starters, happy early work anniversary, Garrett. I just hit mine. I want to say like about 2 weeks ago. So
Congratulations.
it feels like a lot longer, just because of the fact that I don't know about you, but it kind of felt like I found my tribe when I came here to iPullRank, and this is after 12, 13 years in content development and strategy. I've worked with smaller boutique creative agencies that were doing more local SEO. I've worked with SaaS resellers for marketing initiatives and everything. And now I'm here. So I'm really excited to talk to you and everybody else about this content rebalancing term that we've come up with and what it really means and how to kind of apply it to your own organization.
Awesome. Yeah. And to your point, it's been really cool working here. I think, through the whole pandemic, there's almost been like a workforce rebalancing, and people have more freedom than ever to like choose where they work. So for a lot of you, you might be starting a new job and getting involved with your content team. And one of the initial major challenges is going through all of the content you have. Like the bigger organization, the more content that you're potentially working with. And so we're going to dive in. So what we're doing today is all about, what is content equity rebalancing? Why is it important to both your own specific responsibilities and the bigger organization and your goals? How's it fit into your content, overall content strategy? What resources do you need? Like what tools, both free and paid, will help you accomplish what you need to? The actual framework and process on how to approach it. And then how often should you rebalance, which is a tricky question. And, like in the world of SEO, there's a lot of it depends, but we're going to talk through some of those specific situations and when you might want to consider kind of diving into some of these topic clusters and rebalancing them. And then we'll talk next steps. So the overview, content production at volume. So the problem is, like, as a content strategist or SEO lead, our goal is to create content that ranks, right? Really basic. The idea of someone goes to Google and they type in, something relevant to your business, and you're ranking, hopefully on page one, hopefully in the top 3. They click on your link, they go to your website, and hopefully they accomplish a business task like, signing up for a free trial or buying a product. But typically, the larger the company, the more content is produced, as I mentioned, right? So you think about some of these massive sites out there, whether it's, like Adidas and all of the various product pages on an e-commerce site, or, Amazon, another major e-commerce one, or HubSpot, which has focused on inbound marketing, producing a ton of top of the funnel and middle of the funnel content, kind of educational articles across the board of everything marketing, or NerdWallet, same thing in the finance industry. Or even New York Times, you think publications and any sort of topical event, opinion article, anything covering the news. It becomes a lot of content over time, millions and millions of pages that, you are trying, typically not always with an SEO focus. A lot of it might be educational. Some of it might be customer focused. Some of it might be sales focused. But if it's being indexed, meaning it's showing up in the Google search results, you want it to rank. You want people to be able to find it. You don't want to be buried on, the 125th, result, and nobody ever actually clicks on that article. So when you're focused purely on that volume, performance can be a mixed bag of results for organic search. You almost think about the Pareto principle, with the idea that, 20% of your traffic or 80% of your traffic is going to come from only 20% of your content. The goal is obviously you want every single piece to rank, but as marketers or SEOs, we know that that's rarely the case. While some of your content may hit that hyper traffic ranking, so, the top 1 to 3 results, or striking distance rankings, which we classify as like kind of 11 to 20, which is when you think of the traditional page 2, like usually you'll see around 10 organic results on page 1. Once you get to that 11 to 20, you're usually, especially with rich enhancements, you're getting pushed, or with ads, you're getting pushed to page 2 of the search results, and you're going to see significantly less traffic and click-throughs to your pages. Hey, Lydia, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So the idea is, the goal is you want to hit that hyper traffic, because the higher your rankings, the more clicks you'll get, the more traffic you'll drive to your page, and the more likely your users will ultimately, hit those business conversions, whether it's, sign up for a newsletter, or, sign up for a free trial, or ultimately purchase something on your page, depending on what your service or product is. There's also a good chance that a large portion of your content has fallen. It's failed to rank or generate traffic. You put it out there, nothing happens, it doesn't get the clicks, and then it just stays there. You don't do anything with it. It still is on your site, it still exists, but it's really just kind of dead weight. So what do you do with the content that's been indexed but hasn't garnered any results? Should you just like archive the pages as non-indexed, like don't allow Google to crawl them and index them and remove them from the sitemap? No. No, that you don't want to do that. You don't want to just leave them there. There's always value in the content that you've invested in. No, you use the equity of these pages as a foundation for future content pieces and initiatives. So the idea is, even if you didn't, aren't driving a lot of clicks from one of those old pieces of content, maybe somebody has linked a backlink to that content, which actually does have value. That piece of content is not driving any traffic, but why just let that link go to waste? What if we could take the value, the equity of that link, and repurpose it, rebalance it to somewhere else on your site? So you want to create a content rebalancing strategy to leverage that old content and claim, or in some cases, reclaim your brand's authority. You think over the period of 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, the SERPs are constantly changing. Rankings are volatile and always, fluctuating. Maybe at one point your brand was doing really well in search engine results, but since then, for a variety of reasons, it's tanked. With content rebalancing, you can organize your content by topic. So really thinking about this whole idea of entities and aligning your brand with specific topics that you want to be relevant and an authority for. Improve the quality of existing pages. Fill in the gaps, so over time, there's not a ton of new content, but maybe there's content that you haven't addressed for those specific topics that you can create, and connect relevant content with internal linking. And we'll talk a little bit more about why internal linking can be so valuable to your rankings.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing, Garrett, I mean, so when you're producing so much content at that scale, a lot of the times it could be almost like a raindrop in the middle of an ocean. And so with a rebalancing initiative, what you're actually doing is, instead of it just being one single raindrop, it's almost like you're throwing a cannonball into the ocean and making a bigger splash and ripple to really gain more coverage and also strengthen your overall knowledge base on that particular topic.
I love that. Bringing it full circle to our little pool beach analogy,
Yes,
exactly. At the beginning of the webinar. Yes. It's accurate, though. I mean, it really can have that ripple effect and impact so much of your site. So when we talk about what is content equity rebalancing, so the term equity rebalancing has been used in a variety of industries for some time now. And one most common one that you'll think of is the financial industries. Now, as you see in the graphic, this is not financial advice, but if you've ever invested money, there are so many different ways that you can do it, whether you're stocks or crypto. And maybe it's actually not the right time to be talking about any sort of financial portfolios with the whole stock market tanking. But in theory, this idea of not putting all your eggs in one basket. We think about that in marketing as well. You don't want all of your traffic to come from SEO and organic search. You don't want it all to come from advertising. You want to distribute it. And the same goes for your content. So it's this process of realigning the search equity of the digital content assets, which, in our case that we're talking about today, are your website URLs, your specific pages. And through this process, we'll help you redistribute the value of those underperforming pages by either, going through a decision workflow of either potentially updating them and just making them better, merging two pieces of content, just trashing them and redirecting the, invaluable, or the not invaluable is the opposite, the not valuable content to a different page on your site so you can distribute that link equity, or just leaving it as is. If you're killing it for a specific keyword and, doing anything to that page might actually hurt the rankings, you don't mess with it. A rebalance also provides more internal linking opportunities to strengthen the relationship between related content. As we mentioned earlier, with all of the content, the vast volume of content that's been created over time, if you don't have a sort of governance model to go back to that old content and link it to the new relevant topics that you're creating over time, then it's kind of orphaned out there. When you go back and you refresh and you rebalance your content and you start to link together these different pieces that, you might have written 5 or 6 years ago, but is not currently linked to, a topic cluster that's connected, then you're losing opportunity there. So part of this whole process is to link together all of these disparate pieces to form this foundation, this solid topic cluster where all the content is related. And so that also makes it easier for Google to understand what your authority in and to understand that all of these pieces of content aren't together. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment too. One thing to note, and it is tricky when we're deciding which topic clusters to choose to focus on, because you don't necessarily have the resources or the bandwidth to do everything at the same time. Like a site like the New York Times or NerdWallet can't just be like, oh, we're doing a content rebalancing of all of our content in this quarter. Like, they've built up so much over time that it's really more effective to do it in piecemeal. And so if you haven't done something like this in a long time, you really want to invest the right resources to the most needle moving content, right? So you want to think about which of your topic clusters are most aligned to the most valuable revenue generating streams of your business, and what can you, spend the most time or spend the earliest time in that will ultimately lift the business altogether. So I feel like that's a big portion of how you decide which topic cluster to focus on in the first place.
Yeah. And I would say, along with that, it gives you the opportunity to kind of improve more visibility for certain things that you're not really ranking for currently that you want to be. Whether or not, like, say most of your revenue comes from service A, but you really want to highlight some of the things from service B. By doing an approach like this, you can put a little bit more focus and visibility on service B through this rebalance.
I think that's great. That's a great point. And definitely, please feel free to leave questions in the chat. We want to make sure that we address everything that comes up. We'll have a section of that at the end of the webinar. So I see you, H. We will definitely get to the risk of deleting content. So why is content equity, why is content rebalancing important? So if you're going to spend your time and energy on producing rankable content, you need to understand what's working while reducing content decay. Kyle, you want to speak a little to this idea of content decay?
Yeah, so I mean, as the term suggests, it basically refers to a gradual decline of organic traffic after you post or this piece indexes. So this could be anywhere from 3 months to 12 months to 24 months. It just comes down to the fact that sometimes the content that you're going to produce may not necessarily catch. Again, raindrop in the ocean kind of situation. So we recommend definitely with this rebalancing to at least give it a 12-month time span before you make any sort of decisions on what to do with that particular piece.
It's so important, and it's well said, Kyle, because there sometimes you'll see a spike right away, whether you'll get some sort of benefits from just being the new kid on the block, and then Google will kind of always reshuffle depending on different signals as to whether the content deserves to be ranked that high, and it can fluctuate. It's like the dopamine hit we get from social media. You post something, you immediately get all these likes, and then long tail, if it's not performing, then you want to kind of look elsewhere, but you don't want to move too early on this, as Kyle mentioned. So content equity rebalancing gives you the opportunity to leverage the data at your disposal to improve traffic and increase organic growth. So if you have 12 months of data to look at, you can make a much more informed decision as to what's working well and what's not working well. Rather than purely focusing on creating net new content, you're actually saving time and resources by utilizing existing content. You think about some of these larger sites that have been creating content forever and ever and ever, publishers that have that evergreen content that just needs a little attention. Sometimes it'll take a lot less effort to just tweak articles and improve their rankings than starting from scratch, doing all the original research, reaching out to all the subject matter experts, having a bunch of assets designed. All that net new can be a massive resource investment. So sometimes you can do a lot more with a lot less. And then optimize your website further with the type of content that is working while avoiding what's not. So kind of identifying for different queries and search intents what types of content, whether that's, an infographic or including videos or having an actual, some sort of interactive, like an investment calendar, might work more effectively than just the written text. And, for those of you who are following Google and seeing updates with the MUM algorithm, I personally am bullish on the idea that any sort of multimedia content is going to benefit you in the long run. It is much more of an investment, but if you see on your site, depending on your industry, that like videos are working effectively or that infographics are working effectively, it makes sense for you to focus on that type of content and double down. So how does it fit into your content strategy?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, this is just one piece of the overall content strategy, but it's something that definitely should be considered different periodic times, which we'll get into later on. But what a rebalance does is it's almost like you're taking a ski lift up to the top of the mountain rather than just kind of trudging up it yourself. You're hitting the ground running instead of just starting from absolute scratch. And with this, you have the ability to kind of guard or prevent more instances of keyword cannibalization from actually happening, because it can be hard to keep track and manage every single piece produced, especially if you're using different agencies or different resources to do so. This gives you more of almost like a unified approach, and not only that, but you're providing your audience with relevant content, which is great for the overall user experience. The last thing you want to do is rank for an outdated piece of content that is not really that is missing the mark on certain statements or data sets.
Yeah, exactly. It's you want to be relevant.
Yeah, and then why a rebalance should be in your content strategy is literally because it's working smarter than working harder. I mean, you're utilizing a lot of the pieces of content that you've either spent time or money creating, and you're trying to find opportunities to still use that framework. Orbit Media did a study in 2021 that showed that blog writers typically spend about an average of 4 hours per blog post. So I mean, if you're producing, say, like 20 blog posts a month, that's 80 hours right there, that you would have to pay your either in-house writer or outsourced writers to create, when you could actually, maybe you already have some information on these topics. Maybe you've already touched on some of the points. And rather than, spending 4 hours for a blog post, you could spend 2 hours just merging two pieces together to create an even better long form piece of content.
Yeah, and to that point too, it's interesting how a rebalance like this will look different depending on your industry. Like when you're working with like in e-commerce, you might have a template for a certain type of product page, it's a matter of tweaking the template as opposed to creating an entire like top of the funnel article. So, and it's going to be different for a publishing media or, educational, financial companies. It's going to depend on your industry, and you want to think about that. You always have to take your own context into consideration when you're putting together a framework like this. So for instance, and this was kind of relevant to H's question about the potential downside risks of deleting previously published articles outright. So actually there was a really cool case study done today by Keyword Insights. This is like Andy Chadwick and Suganthan Mahanadesan. And what they found was by going through a whole range of content articles that are targeting individual specific keywords. So, say you have 4 or 5 variations of the same keyword. This site actually had articles for every single variation. And they realized with topic clustering that what they could actually do was merge those pages together to focus on the set of keywords, like the 5 different variations, and redirect those articles to the one. And they did this with hundreds of thousands of articles to avoid any sort of keyword content cannibalization. And the idea behind this is that if you have a bunch of content that's in essence targeting the same keyword and the same intent, then potentially Google doesn't know which of your articles to rank. And so as a result, both of them are kind of pushed down, and you can't reach the peak ranking that you would by combining them into one article. And the lower the ranking, there's actually an exponential growth when it comes to the click-through rate of a higher ranking article. When we were talking earlier about hyperranking traffic, you have exponentially more clicks to your website in 1 through 3 than the page 2s of 11 through 20. And so what they did here is they deleted a whole bunch of pages, and they actually saw a 110% increase by redirecting them appropriately. Now, H, to answer your question about the downside risks of deleting previous published articles, I think with SEO, there's always risks, right? And I think it's really whenever you approach a project like this, especially when you're making significant changes, whether it's a web design update or deleting a significant amount of content and redirecting it, I think you have to have a sort of stomach for what you're willing to gamble with. It's funny, I had this uncle who used to give me the advice, you should only gamble with what you're willing to lose. Now, obviously with any of this stuff, we want it to, we want a sure thing. And I think that to our point earlier with informed decisions, you can get a sense of looking at the data of what performs based on what you can see historically. And that informed decision can give you a certain amount of confidence when you delete pages. But I would say, we'll talk about some of the decision workflows, but with a lot of this, it's like, if there's a risk, if there's that in between, then a lot of times you're going to want to err on the side of caution, right? Like when we're talking about deleting pages, a lot of times we're talking about deleting a page that hasn't received any traffic for 12 months. And so there's very low risk in deleting that, but high reward by redistributing the link equity. So that's kind of the thought process of that. I think with anything, there's a decision tree when it comes to, whether you should delete a page or not and what the risk is to doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point before, I mean, it's such a competitive landscape now to just in general, no matter what industry you're in. Just reducing the amount of keyword cannibalization keeps the focus on competing with others rather than competing with yourself over 2 or 3 pieces of similar content. So combining all of those together not only helps strengthen your approach in general, but it also kind of keeps things more organized and the goal and focus on, doing better than the competitors.
And one last thing I'll point out about keyword cannibalization, which I think is a very misunderstood concept in the world of content and SEO, is when we're talking about keyword cannibalization, we're talking about literally targeting the same keyword with the same intent, right? Like there are going to be situations where you have a keyword and you go to the search engine results page on, like you type it in Google and you look at it, and it actually has different types of intent. Like if you type in just chocolate chip cookies, you're going to see, information about recipes about chocolate chip cookies. You're going to see the history of chocolate chip cookies. You're going to see where to buy chocolate chip cookies. Those are all different types of intent. So having an article for each of those types of intent for the same keyword makes sense. If you're just creating basically the same article with just like a slight variation of the keyword, but it's basically the same information for the same person with the same search intent, that's going to result in keyword cannibalization. So one more thing with internal linking impact is you can take a look at Brian Dean of Backlinko has this great visual of where your internal linking really is putting together the site architecture. One of the reasons that you want to think about internal linking and invest in a really organized structure is it does allow Google and various bots and crawlers to understand your site better. And the better that it understands your site, the more likely it is to assign the appropriate entities and topics and expertise and authoritativeness to that site. So you always want to have a well-structured site in the same way that each article you want well-structured content, right? It goes at a global macro level for your site. And actually, so Cyrus Shepard of Zippy did a really great study that came out actually last week, all about internal linking and how there is a point when you can internally link too much. You don't want to just internally link haphazardly. The whole process of this, rebalancing framework is to internally link appropriate articles and create these topic clusters, right? To make sure that you're not just internally linking anything, you are doing it in a methodical way that makes sense for the topics that you want to gain authority in. So there we go. There we go.
All right.
Kyle?
So now we're going to dive into what kind of what are the common resources that you would need to actually pull something like this off. To start off, not all content strategists have a deep SEO background. So if your team allows it and has an SEO analyst, definitely tap them in for this and have this be more of a collaboration between the two departments. I say this because one of the first things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to identify the topic cluster that you really want to target. Consider, your value propositions and what you want to be found for in search results. And then from there, analyze the overall monthly search volume for the specific term itself, as well as identify long tail keyword opportunities. So for this example, we recommend SEMrush and Ahrefs, but I know that Garrett has also found, a pretty full list of free and paid SEO tools as well.
Yeah, that link is from Sam Underwoods, and he's vetted all of these different SEO tools. But to Kyle's point, it's important to make the right decision with your keyword clustering and your topic clustering. So using these tools to get that started, they're super helpful. There's so many nuances. You can get lost in SEMrush and Ahrefs in how they provide not only ideas for the keywords, but guidance in terms of what are considered in the same cluster. And, like at iPullRank, for instance, when we're working with clients, we build out an entire keyword portfolio that not only takes into consideration clusters, but when you're doing this, you're going to want to think about the buyer's journey and make sure that you're addressing keywords at awareness, like people who are just starting to learn about, the situation, familiarity, consideration, decision-making. The keyword is not just the topic cluster is not just the top of the funnel. It starts at the top and goes all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I would be a little biased, but I would say that SEMrush has a really great feature set that not a lot of people are really familiar with. It's actually kind of buried under their content marketing section, but they do have a whole tool just called topic research that will do a lot of this heavy lifting for you and give you a lot of great ideas as to what you can kind of identify, like what Garrett said, with identifying, unrelated topic clusters that kind of coincide with you that you wouldn't have necessarily been aware of. So if you already are subscribed to SEMrush, definitely use that certain tool to your advantage.
That's a great endorsement. It's funny. We should have signed up for the affiliate version of SEMrush, but we do not get paid for endorsing any of these tools on this webinar.
Yeah, that was just my personal opinion right there. So after you kind of have an idea of what topic cluster or clusters you want to go after, now's the time where you actually start looking at your own performance metrics. So for this, you're going to want to use Google Search Console, Google Analytics. I mean, even using the very old school site colon, your website and the topic cluster term right on Google itself will also provide a lot of great insights in that sense. But you definitely want to start pulling in all of the metrics that we feel are relevant to this exercise, because that's going to play a large role with how everything is going to be scored at the end.
Yeah, that's a big thing is looking at the actual click traffic and some of the metrics on the page, which we'll talk about a little bit, will contribute to that decision tree.
Yep. And then just for everyone's sanity, especially if you're working with an entire team or collaborating as well with your SEO team, putting it all together into one spreadsheet potentially something like a Google spreadsheet where you could have a lot of people in there all at once kind of working together, it's really beneficial to create like almost like a repository. So this will not only be used for identification, but it'll also be used to kind of track your progress throughout, especially if you're handing it off to different team members and everything. You can make it your own, but definitely include some sort of notes column in there. That way it's a lot easier for everyone involved to really know where this project is at that point.
And for all you wonderful attendees and people who are watching this in the future, don't you worry, because we have a spreadsheet version that we have provided access to. It'll come in an email after the webinar that you can make a copy and then start working on this with your team yourself. One thing I wanted to mention from the previous slide, kind of talking about Google Search Console and analytics, is the larger the team, the harder it might be to get access to some of those other tools. Typically, you'll want to reach out to any SEO on your team, should have access to it, or an analytics team if you have that. If not, it might just be your head of marketing. And if you haven't set it up, then you can be the hero of your organization. It's free. Go set up Google Search Console or Google Analytics. I mean, you might actually have like another analytics tool outside of Google Analytics, but at least Google Search Console, you'll want to set up for free to make sure you start to get those insights of, what queries people are using to find different pages of your website.
So now we'll get into how do you actually approach a content rebalance. So we kind of touched on this topic before, but you're going to want to first start off with a topic cluster, and you're going to really want to consider what has direct business value to you, to your company, your products or services. Not only that, but while you're looking through your existing content, you're going to want to identify any sort of need state gaps in the buyer's journey. You may have a lot of awareness pieces, but you lack any sort of, purchase level content pieces. So, that's something to definitely notate in that repository to know that, this is an opportunity for us to kind of close the gap and really strengthen the overall approach. And most importantly, you want to make sure that you're putting all this time and effort into something that has a healthy amount of search volume for your specific target audience. You don't want to waste all this time and effort on something that is unattainable.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And we were talking a little bit before about this idea of like the next search intent, which I think is really cool. It's kind of, going through this whole buyer's journey. Can you speak to a little bit to the next search intent concept?
Yeah, so I think, one of the biggest things with overall content strategy and production is sometimes we get a little too in the weeds with the specific piece or initiative that we're working on, and we forget about how this piece of the puzzle kind of fits into the bigger picture. So next search intent refers to the fact that, like, while you're creating this piece of content, how does this fit with the other need states within the buyer's journey? And then what other pieces can be a result of this piece that you're working on to kind of cover all bases with it. So if you're working on an awareness one, what would the person be searching if they're in the consideration phase for this term? And then kind of addressing that in another content piece helps you create that big picture.
Exactly. And then you're going to ultimately link all those internally, and then they can find it two ways: either from your initial piece that drives them further down the funnel, or the next time they come back to the search, to Kyle's point of like a more refined query of what is that next search.
Yeah. So where do you begin with all of this? Like we had said, you're going to want to do an internal query. So you can use the site approach through Google. You could use another resource like Ahrefs or SEMrush or one of the other tools that we mentioned in the link list before. But this will give you an idea of exactly like how many pieces of content you're working with for that particular cluster. And honestly, like, it's better to approach it that way rather than going after your entire corpus. Because if you're going to do something like that, you still want to break it up into different phases. This will, definitely reduce the risk and disruption to your SERP performance and volatility. So like Garrett was saying before, only gamble with what you're willing to lose. You don't want to just go all in on your first endeavor for something like this.
Exactly.
And then once you've compiled the list, at this point, you're going to really utilize this repository and gather as much performance metrics as possible. Like we said, you want to at least give 12 months to your content pieces, because that'll give you the best idea of exactly what you're working with. And some of the things that you're going to want to really focus on are, the overall clicks and page visits, impression volume, average time on page, bounce rate, a lot of the metrics that you'll find in either Google Search Console or in Google Analytics. For us internally, we have our own extensive scoring system that's really based on a certain set of specific metrics and different weights for those metrics, just because, as we've learned through a lot of different things, that Google it's not an equal kind of like approach to everything, like links can have a more of a weight than, just meta titles and descriptions and stuff like that.
Yeah, we like focus on this whole idea of this content engineering. So, like when we're approaching it, whether it's updating old content or creating that new, like scientifically the way through the clues that Google gives us, because obviously it's a black box, but to Kyle's point, the way that we're kind of trying to address on-page SEO, technical SEO, links, and these different factors that are weighted differently. I mean, this broadcast is May 31st. The webinar last week, there was a core algorithm update. And during those updates, a lot of times Google's trying to update the search results to give the best results for any given, to any given query. And so a lot of times what they're doing, these core algorithms, is they are like adjusting the weights. So we'll talk a little bit about like when to do the content rebalancing, but this is like an ongoing process. It's never a like you do the content rebalancing once and you are good to go. Never again. Don't look at that content.
Yeah. And then this gives you, I was just going to say that other slide kind of shows you a little sneak peek of what you'll get at the end of this webinar and all that kind of good stuff. But now we'll get into the actual now what from after you have this repository built. So, you're going to have basically 4 different choices in your decision tree. You could either refresh the content, you can merge the content and then redirect one of the URLs. You can redirect the URL entirely and archive that content, or you could just keep things as is, just because of either the performance metrics or other factors that we'll get into. So refreshing the existing content pieces. I mean, this comes down to if you're already scoring really good metrics with this, you have high engagement, a minor refresh can be the option because you want to make sure that this piece of content has all of the internal linking opportunities to either newer pieces of content or cornerstone pieces of content that you're using for this rebalance.
Yeah. And then the other thing about that is, so when you're actually going through the refresh, this might be something as simple as like updating statistics with, relevant content, relevant links, stats that aren't from like 8 to 10 years ago. And then also a real big part of this is the internal links process, right? So, when you're using that spreadsheet and you're going through a topic cluster, you have this set of links potentially that you'll want to find opportunities to vary the anchor text and connect it to your different articles. So it's a very tight, distributed, link equity across the topic cluster.
Exactly. And so the second option would be to merge content pieces together. So this would refer to old URLs that still have valuable information, but lack any, valuable engagement metrics. So what you would do with this is basically you would find you would identify 2 of the pieces of content that you have out there that kind of overlap with each other and merge them together to create a stronger piece of content. And you would house that piece of content on whatever URL is performing stronger than the other. The weaker one would then be used as like link equity and can be used for net new pieces of content.
Yeah, and the other point of that, to clarify too, is you're going to use the same actual URL of the like winning piece of content. You're going to want to redirect it's really important that you redirect the old piece of content, even if you're keeping the actual content for use at a future date. You want to take that URL, and it's a technical, we'll talk a little bit about redirecting, but you want to make sure that you're actually, so when people go to that page, they don't see either the old content or they don't see like an error 404 page. They actually get redirected to that new improved content that you've created from the merged pieces.
Yep. And that goes right into this one as well. Redirecting content pieces. This refers to, any of the URLs that still possess a digital equity but drive little to no engagement. So they should be definitely considered and marked within that spreadsheet as opportunities for redirect. So more often than not, the content on these redirect URLs are still valuable. So rather than just tossing it, it's better to either shelve it or consider different opportunities that you could use that content for, whether it's repurposing it as an infographic or creating a video out of it. All the content that you produce is always valuable. So never just, automatically destroy it once, you're kind of repurposing that URL.
Exactly. And just keep in mind too, you might have that piece of content that you're redirecting to like internally linked throughout the site. If you can, the sooner rather than later, you want to update those internal links so the internal link doesn't redirect, because over time Google doesn't love to like jump from page to page to page internally. If you can have the now actual URL, update those internal links on the content on page wherever you can. And I'll just talk to this real quick. Is just the whole idea about 301 redirecting is that it is a technical term, and depending on the type of org that you're in or your responsibilities, whether you're a content marketer or if you are an SEO or if you're an IT, if you don't have the ability to do redirects, you'll just want to reach out to your team internally and find the person who does. Usually my advice is try to simplify the process as much as possible. Like, don't ask for one at a time. Get together an entire spreadsheet of all the URLs that you want to redirect, and then be as prepared as possible before you send that if you're working with someone else, so there aren't any miscommunications. So, things don't get redirected that are supposed to, or things that are supposed to get redirected don't, because that it can be a disaster for your SEO, and you don't want to create problems inadvertently with a refresh like this.
Exactly. This is a collaborative effort. So, try to play well with the other team members, and batching is definitely a great way to keep everybody organized and focused.
Keeping the content.
All right. So this is pretty straightforward and simple, as the name suggests. You're just going to keep this content as is. This could either be a piece of content that's performing extremely well, and if it is relevant to your topic clusters, then all you would necessarily have to do is just add some internal linking to the cornerstone pieces. Other instances where you would keep this particular piece of content would be even if it does appear for a certain topic cluster, the actual content itself may be better housed with a different topic cluster. So you may just want to keep this for another opportunity down the road.
Okay, and so how often should you do a rebalance? And one question that did come up real quick was just this, are there any other factors that you should consider beyond content and backlinks? Those really are the core. I mean, there are nuances within it in terms of the idea of like any technical SEO that you want to improve. You'll want to do that through any refresh, any internal linking, as we mentioned, any opportunities for, structured data to provide more like insights to Google in an informational architecture sort of way is highly recommended. But it is mostly content, and it is mostly distributing the backlink equity and not losing the value there. I think one other thing is just to be on the same page with your sales team or your customer service team, if they find value from specific pages, to let them know, even if you're not thinking about this from an SEO perspective, like from obviously a customer perspective, you want to make sure that your customers can still find the information and the content that is really valuable to them. So how often should you audit? So for iPullRank, we conduct an audit each and every time we're preparing to launch a campaign for a client. Kyle, you want to speak to that when we're working with clients, how we kind of think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of iPullRank's deliverables is a content audit, and what this does is, while we're doing the qualitative portion, it kind of gives us an inside look at certain opportunities that we can take and really promote, and that ties into when we suggest a content plan to our clients. And with the content plans, we try to present the issue that they're facing and then a solution. And a lot of the times the issues are, you have a lot of content here, but you're missing the mark on these opportunities that fall in between. So, for this, let's do this whole initiative. Let's see what you're working with already, and then ideate and identify new pieces of content that we could add to kind of create a cornerstone to really strengthen the overall approach. Whether that's being found for a long tail term, or whether it's you want to start ranking for a new phrase that is just starting to kind of come into fruition, and you want to capitalize on it. This by doing an audit and kind of doing the rebalancing work in those cases are definitely helpful with moving forward in content creation.
It's so true, and it's really tied to business, right? It's like, I think working with us, like our key is really tying it back to the business goals. And so ultimately, the question, internally a lot of times is not how often. That's the wrong question. It's more thinking about like what's prompting this interest in producing new content. If you're like, I just need to create something new, you can think about all these different situations where a content rebalancing might make a lot of sense for your organization, whether it's like preparing a net new campaign where you do have an idea and you need to look at if that content already exists. You might have a performance drop for cornerstone topic cluster. Like if you are, moving along merrily and traffic for SEO is great, and then, over the course of a few weeks or months, you start to see some real negative trends, that's not prompted by a regular cadence. That's really just, okay, we're seeing a performance drop. We need to figure out how we can fix this. And going through the audit process and the rebalancing makes a lot of sense then. If you do identify content gaps for a topic cluster, say that a topic cluster that you covered 6, 7, 8 years ago has really expanded and become either more complicated, more nuanced, or just there's a lot more information to it, and you haven't created content for those gaps in the content in the topic cluster, you might want to do the rebalance and identify, where do you have those gaps? Where can you merge and fill those gaps and just add a little or a lot? If you have the resources to work on multiple clusters consistently, the larger the organization, yes, there's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to which projects to focus on and how to allocate resources, but maybe you have multiple content teams that can tackle entire topic clusters at a given time, or maybe you're a one-person show and you really can only do one topic cluster at a time. If you can keep the governance of this and keep the people responsible, whether that's your content marketing team, your SEO team, your kind of growth marketing, whole contingent, the way you think about that will dictate how many of these topic clusters and how frequently you can be doing this rebalance. Having a regular cadence does make sense. In terms of a governance model, if you have editors and a content team that can look back and keep abreast of it before it becomes a bigger issue, so you're consistently updating at least your most important topic clusters, that makes a lot of sense. And to have that kind of baked into your editorial schedule in your calendar, or event driven. I mean, the truth of the matter is, last week we had an SEO algorithm update. Obviously, a couple years ago with the pandemic, the way people are searching, what they're searching for, keyword volume might change dramatically. And so there might actually be different shifts in search intent. All of that would make you want to look back and rebalance and think about the way that your specific topic cluster is even being searched for. One example is Lily Ray of AMSIP Digital did a great presentation a couple of years ago during the pandemic when everyone was staying inside, sports leagues were shut down. And when you search for, a sport like football, in the UK, like Nautica, or, like football, American football in the US, Instead of showing anything related to the actual sport, like on ESPN during that time, Google started to show video game results, because at that time, the search intent for football was all about video games and less about getting football scores, because football wasn't happening. Think about that, and how at any given moment, the intent for your targeted keyword universe or your topic clusters could be shifting from something beyond your control. You might want to adjust your content strategy accordingly and rebalance accordingly. So we made it. We're basically almost at time. We did want to take the time to answer any questions if there are in the chat. I think we did ultimately cover a lot of them as we were kind of going through it. Kyle, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share when it comes to approaching a content rebalance?
Like with anything, the first one's always going to be the scariest, but take your time with it. Don't rush through it. Definitely utilize our template to try to help give you some guidance and direction. And also at the end of the day, like, it comes down to like some intuition as well. Like you'll know whether or not a piece should be merged or should just be archived. And the data should support that. But trust your instincts.
I think that's a really great point, especially in the sense of like the manual work that you can do. Like, sometimes the best thing you can do is really going into Google search and looking at what is autocorrect providing, what are, people also ask types of queries, especially with MUM, which is the most recent algorithm. Google is trying to help you refine your search and help you figure out what you're looking for more effectively. So you're going to start to see in the search results more guiding navigation, like these tabs and pills that are saying like, want to know more, or what else should you know about this topic? And those are all going to be clues for the type of content and the gaps that you're going to want to fill through your own topic clusters. For anyone who's wondering, the replay of this webinar will be emailed out in a few hours, as well as we'll get to you the spreadsheet so you can copy it and make it your own. You'll be able to get access to all of that, rewatch as many times as you want. We will also include the deck in the follow-up email that you'll receive, so you can go to all of these links that we referenced throughout the webinar. And we also will be giving you a modern approach to enterprise content strategy. We created this like epic, amazing, so good ebook that we'll give you free access to. It's like 70 pages. We talked to a bunch of great experts from like QuickBooks and Shopify and Bluehost about, other aspects of a content audit, content workflows, and how to build out, a process for creating great content, governance, which is really underrated in our industry. Like, who should be in charge of what? Like, how do you get sign off from things? How do you make sure that your writers are writing and have all the information that they need from a content brief, and designers are designing and they have all the information, and how it all gets brought together from a project manager? So definitely get access to that from the email. And another self plug. Okay, so I do this SEO weekly. I'm an SEO geek. I try to update on all the industry stuff on a weekly basis. I try to make it fun, whether it's articles or things happening in SEO Twitter, or new tools that are coming out. I actually had a brand new episode come out today, so you can access that at iPullRank.com/resources/SEO weekly. And then we've got a podcast called Rankable, which we actually haven't had a new episode in a hot minute. That said, I've been recording for this next season. I've interviewed 5 amazing women that I'm really excited to start publishing. But there are a ton of great episodes that you can watch that are evergreen, that are still relevant. So check out the podcast. Really want to thank you all for joining us today. I love doing this. Is the first webinar that Kyle and I did together. Yeah. Kyle, anything that you want to say? How can we find you online? What's the best way to get in touch?
So I mean, well, for one, thank you for letting me doing this with you. SEO Weekly, Rankable, both must watch pieces right there. So if you're missing out. I see it as the new Whiteboard Friday. Um, they can reach me at any of these links under my name. I will warn you guys, my Twitter is a little dusty. I was using it for a while to promote some freelance comic book review pieces, but now I'm gonna start to actually have to get more into the whole content strategy.
Absolutely. Kyle is he's a comic book fan. He's an awesome dude. Definitely hit him up. Our emails are there. So if you have any questions about content, iPullRank or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm, my name, Garrett Sussman on Twitter. Thank you all again. We'll send out that email with all of the replays and all that stuff after this. Y'all enjoy the rest of your week. From Garrett and Kyle, sign off. Y'all have a good one.
Stay cool out there.
Or try your best.